quality of a Fire Emblem map can be separated into 5 different factors. Flavor, how well the map matches the story and atmosphere that it is trying to portray, and whether or not it succeeds at making you feel like you're really experiencing the story as the developers intended. Objective, what the map is asking you to do in order to finish the chapter, be it seizing, routing, escaping, or defending. Is it offering you an objective that is interesting to work towards? Replayability, you finished the chapter, now how do you feel about it? Frustrated? Relieved? Satisfied? There's any number of possible outcomes that can occur after finishing a chapter, so consider whether or not you'd enjoy playing the chapter again on a subsequent playthrough. Difficulty. Difficulty might not be an important factor for everyone, but a fair amount of players yearn to be challenged by Fire Emblem, to be given a puzzle to solve with the resources provided. Was the map that you just finished difficult in a compelling way? Enjoyability. Plain and simple, is the map fun to play? Are you having a good time whilst playing it, and if so, are you able to articulate exactly why the map is so stimulating? When all of these variables are managed effectively, what you're left with is an incredibly satisfying chapter to play through, providing a memorable experience for the player that they'll hopefully be excited to enjoy again during a second playthrough. And if you don't pay attention to this formula, what you're given is some of the worst the series has to offer. My name's Blute. Welcome to F.O.R.D.E. And welcome back to another episode of F.O.R.D.E. This time tackling an Echoes map, or Gaiden if you're one of those people who are particular for whatever reason. One of the 10 people in the world who have actually managed to, play Gaiden to completion. I'm not one of them. I'm not afraid to admit that I have not completed Gaiden. I touched it once and was like, ooh, wow, my fingers don't feel good, and then I stopped playing it. And that's the story of my Gaiden adventure. Oh man, I love Echoes. Echoes is like an absolute just, pillar of the ideal that presentation can carry a game, because whoa Nelly, there is not a whole lot going on in there, gameplay, story, map wise, but man is it pretty to look at, and boy does it feel nice to play. It's a real shame the actual map design kinda leaves a lot to be desired. Again, it's not really a secret that Echoes or Gaiden does not have good map design. Most of the time it's just wide open spaces, or swamps that make you want to stop playing, or deserts that make you want to stop playing, or Nui Baba's Tower, or Nui Baba's wacky roller coaster adventure of, I'll reduce your health to 1, and if you don't have warp, then you can go fuck yourself. Why do I like Echoes again? Oh yeah, because it's pretty. It's pretty. Anyway, you would have been able to guess today's episode if you had solved my wicked difficult anagram of another stage-like Q gift, as it turns out, as this translates directly into Retaking of the Sluice Gate. It doesn't have a specific chapter, number in Echoes, but I guess it's just Act 3 endgame for Alm. Echoes is really awkward to talk about with the show, because it doesn't use traditional chapter names or traditional chapter numbers, so we're kinda gonna wing it, and we'll see what happens. And like I said, it's very difficult to talk about a lot of Echoes chapters, because they're kind of nothingy, so I'm very glad that was a request for one that made it so I didn't have to, actively think about, what Echoes chapter would be interesting to talk about. Oh, thank you, kind viewer, for doing all the thinking for me, as this is definitely, one of the more interesting chapters in Echoes. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive into the categories. Starting with flavor, as always. For starters, let's just establish some ground rules. Go ahead and take all of these categories with a pretty, fair pinch of salt. Because you have to remember that we're dealing with Echoes or Gaiden here, so the overall standards have to, be taken down a notch or two. Otherwise, you're going to be making some unfair comparisons. If you're going into a Gaiden chapter expecting the same level of quality as something like Fates' gameplay or, Radiant Dawn variety, then you're going to be quickly disappointed. Gaiden isn't exactly impressing on a lot of fronts. If every other game in the series is, someone in college or university, or, doing a master's degree or doing a PhD, then Echoes is still in middle school and struggling with long division, so to say. It's still very much struggling with the basics. Anyway, on to flavor, which is a bit of a tricky one this time around. It should be a very simple affair of the chapter making you feel as though you're both trying to re-seize control of the Sluice Gate, and also, more importantly, rescue Delthea, or Deltea, however you're supposed to pronounce it, from Karga's mind control fetish at the same time. Overall, the map should evoke the feeling of... how would you put it? You'd put it as determination. As in the story, it's as though Alm is almost attempting to accomplish too many things at once. As stated by, Clive being you should probably just, not save Delthea, because it's kind of putting, the overall mission of the Deliverance at risk. And I was like, no, I can do it. I'm built different. That's basically what happens in the story, and turns out he is built different because he can do everything. But I'm not sure it's presented in the most effective way possible. We'll get more into how Delthea functions in later categories, but for now, I'd say the chapter's entire flavor hinges on how she is portrayed on the map. In the sense that if she isn't used enough, or she's used too much, then the flavor will suffer, so to say, if you understand. Now, the unfortunate part about this is that Delthea's presence on the map will basically just be decided by RNG, spoilers, as whether or not she chooses to use teleportation is literally just random chance. As I found out recently by wiki surfing, it's fully possible that she just doesn't use it at all, and effectively does nothing for the entirety of the chapter, which kind of blows and absolutely just throws the flavor in the toilet. It can turn an otherwise very, interesting map about having to hold back your army from, killing this small child into what is effectively just one of Celica's Act 2 maps where you're just killing a bunch of mages, which is very uninteresting. In addition to Delthea's potential disappointment, I kind of wish the boss himself had a little bit more presence overall, as Tatara just sort of exists as, yet another Dark Mage, despite at least having some build-up and acting as, the quote final boss for ARMS Act 3. Call me a masochist, but I kind of wish he was given a little bit more range. Not too much, not too much! You know, I'm not a Siege Tome enjoyer, but I kind of wish he had either a little bit more range on his tome, to the point where it was basically a Siege Tome like Nui Baba's, whatever it's called. I forget what it's called, Medusa or something like that? Something along those lines, or you could give him a more advantageous position to really make the map feel like a struggle, as you're weathering all of these attacks from these conniving mages, but still pushing through to accomplish your task of rescuing Delthea, while still managing to, exterminate all the Dark Mages. And I will just quickly say before we move on to the next category that I do appreciate that Delthea doesn't just have a simple talk to recruit solution. It's much like almost like Garnith in an Oasis of Magic, and that there isn't just a simple solution to the problem. The enemy is not going to just roll over, you have to figure out the solution to the puzzle. And that you do actually have to deal with her as an enemy. But the unfortunate part about this, the other side of the coin, is that there's a very, very real possibility that she effectively just stands still for the entire map and completely just, again, tosses the flavor in the junk, as you will quickly find out by the footage you're watching. She decided not to teleport at all, which both made the map a joke difficulty-wise, but also just kind of made it feel like it was a stage production missing one of its main actors. It just felt really, really awkward. I think making unit AI inconsistent can lead to some particularly unengaging gameplay that also hampers how flavorful the chapter can be. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give this category a fail. It definitely feels like it could have done it better, even by Echo standards. Now onto Objective. Again, it's Gaiden, so I'm not exactly expecting much. Virtually every single chapter in Echoes is either defeat boss or route, so it's not like the chapter is leaping out at me in terms of variety, but as far as map quality goes in Gaiden, it's honestly one of the more memorable layouts. Instead of just being either a wide open space with enemies just kind of randomly pipped around the map, just we'll put a cav here, we'll put 2 soldiers here, we'll put an archer over here, an archer on cover, woo, more variety. Echoes you shouldn't have. Instead of doing that, or having a swamp that makes you question why you've even loaded up Echoes to begin with, you're actually presented with a fair amount of obstacles to conquer if you want to make it all the way to Tatara, that being the glut of Dark Mages. Now, I'm never a fan of just making a chapter with just a single unit type, as it can make the map really, really simple to accomplish, so to say. And it still stands here, but at least the mages have a little bit of variety in their magic types, aka whether they have 3 range or not with Maya or Miasma. It's not much, it's not a massive cornucopia of variety, but you really gotta take whatever you can get when it comes to Gaiden, because shit is real dry in terms of variety. Now for side objectives, the only real side objective is the previously mentioned Delthea, who is less of a side objective per se, as I'd classify side objectives as ideas or factors that the player has to actively work towards if they want to complete them. Whereas Delthea functions more as just like a stage hazard in fucking Smash. She's completely unpredictable and you don't really know what she's going to do. Again, I'm pretty sure that her AI is entirely decided by luck. So there's a fair chance that she could just go after your more fortuitous units and not be that threatening, or she could go after Clive and potentially just one-shot him because Clive has 1 res. If this AI was actually consistent, then I'd consider it to be a legitimately well-crafted threat for the player to manage. But since that's not the case, the map ultimately doesn't really have much else going on outside of a lone enemy type dealing potentially high amounts of damage. Yeah, this one's a little bit tricky, because again, you're kind of going to lower your standards. Whereas, like, a passing grade for previous maps is, like, you got to have a C or higher. I'd say a passing grade for here is, like, a D+. And I'd say flavor is, like, a D-. But here, compared to a lot of other maps in Gaiden, for the context of Echoes, I think the chapter does succeed in objective. It is actually relatively deep and interesting compared to a lot of the other, I hate using this word, but slop in Gaiden. But when you compare it to, like, other maps in the series, then yeah, it's pretty basic. I'll be generous and give this a pass purely because of the lowered standards. Replayability. Again, really strange categories, not even like, difficult ones, like just a little peculiar. But yeah, very strange, as normally I'd say the map will play out mostly the same each time you play it, as there wouldn't normally be much room for like little differences here and there on different playthroughs. However, despite Dalthea's kooky random nature being a massive bane for the other categories, it actually assists replayability by quite a bit. It may sound kind of silly, but by giving the player the potential chance to have a threat that can either function as something completely negligible, or as the core identity of the map, and like the driving force behind the difficulty, it can make every subsequent playthrough of the chapter feel vibrantly different. For example, on the footage you're watching now, I literally didn't have to interact with her at all. But I distinctly remember her being an absolute nuisance on my last playthrough, immediately teleporting into my backline and becoming a massive issue for me to deal with. Again, not the best decision to make this random chance, but as it turns out, it can do wonders for making the chapter feel lively on subsequent playthroughs. It almost adds like a factor of like, oh, we're going into the Sluice gate. How's Dalthea gonna act this time? Oh, nice! She didn't like teleport into my army and murder everyone this time. Or, oh fuck, she's just decided to like single out Lucas and decide that he's gonna have a bad day today. Something like that. It works. It works in a very peculiar way. As for the rest of the map, you'll have your usual factors of variance, with your villagers likely being different classes, being possible like difficulty alterations, like maybe you're playing Iron Man, maybe you're playing on hard for the first time. But that's not really specific to the map. Ultimately, the map will probably play out the same way outside of Dalthea, due to all of the mages using relatively hard-hitting magic and Echoes and Gaiden not believing in resistance as a stat, because that shit's for cowards. You're also probably going to be using the same units to combat the enemy forces most of the time, i.e. archers who can outright avoid the damage by outranging them, or higher res units like Matilda being used as the front line to mitigate most of the damage from Maya and Miasma. Very basic stuff overall, but again, in terms of Echo standards, I'd say it's one of the more replayable maps, so I'll continue to be generous and give this category a pass as well. This is kind of like the flavor in Unbroken Heart, in that it almost succeeds by accident, by making a mistake that hinders every other category, but works for this one specifically. Now, moving on to a category that it absolutely does not succeed on is difficulty. While I talked about how Dalthea can work like rather nicely for improving the chapter's replayability, it certainly doesn't do any favors for the chapter's difficulty. It's no secret that Echoes isn't an especially difficult game overall. There's occasional challenging maps like Nui Baba's Tower, and I think like the overall dungeon of Act 5 can be pretty like bothersome overall, but like, most of the difficulty doesn't actually come from good maps, so to say. It's not usually for good reasons. Like, most of the chapters that actually have some difficulty are swamp maps, or desert maps, or maps with siege tomes, aka stuff that isn't fun to deal with, plain and simple. As for the Sluice Gate, the chapter doesn't exactly offer a whole lot in terms of struggle. Like I said, there's only a single enemy type, which means that once you've found a solution for one of the enemies, you've almost certainly found the most efficient way to deal with the entire map, which will pretty much just be a case of using bows to outrange tomes, i.e. abusing the killer bow as much as possible. Once you figure this out, the only potential trouble will come from Dalthea, which is completely up to the gods, but you have absolutely no say in what happens there, so just pray and hope it turns out alright. And as for Tatara himself, I found out on my most recent footage that he moves off of his cover tile, which actually would have been really beneficial to him because it gives him regen and would have let him have like, I think 40 extra avoid. So it was very strange to watch Tatara decide to toss himself into Tobin's sweet embrace as the killer bow sent him into the next dimension. Yeah, it just makes for a very underwhelming chapter overall. There really isn't that many enemies to go on. They're all a single, like, weapon type. If Dalthea is kind to you, then there really just isn't anything that could really pass for something resembling a challenge. It's really as simple as the chapter cannot succeed on difficulty if its main facet of said difficulty is decided completely by RNG, as the variance simply becomes too high for a consistently challenging map. That came out as a lot of like, I'm saying a lot of big words to sound smart, I'm using a lot of jargon, but you get the idea. If you have RNG as like your core design principle of the map, then you can't really have a consistently hard chapter, and consistent difficulty is what you want when it comes to difficulty rather than completely random difficulty. Like imagine if, say, FE6 Chapter 7, the amount of wyverns that spawned was completely up to RNG. Like it could be like 0 to 7. That'd be fucking stupid, because you just reset the chapter over and over again until you get 0. Or if you're on an Iron Man, it's like, good job, you made it to Chapter 7. Here's 7 wyverns. Die. You really shouldn't be using RNG as your main, like, core principle when it comes to difficulty. Yeah, no, the chapter absolutely fails in terms of difficulty. Definitely its weakest category. Now for our final category, Enjoyability. As always, Enjoyability is going to have an element of opinion in it. And for me this time around, I really don't enjoy this chapter. I've rattled on and on about how the RNG basically ruins the difficulty, but outside of that, the chapter really just doesn't have much else going on. Like I said, single enemy type, and not that many, as I established. While this might make the chapter seem really easy, it also has the big problem of making it so, like, half of your units basically don't matter in this map. As I established, the most important units that you'll be using on this map are archers, so Python, and potentially like a villager if you've made them into an archer, and characters with high res like Matilda. So for the other Sammys and Tammys in your army who have such features like lower res, like Clive and Lucas, or characters without like long range, like a mercenary not using the lightning sword, they're probably just going to be relegated to being cheerleaders, while the actual useful units do all the work. Again, this category is kind of an awkward one. It's mostly down to personal preference, but I think in order to make me, like, truly, like properly immersed with your map and be like, whoa, I'm fucking gaming, I'm fucking... That sounded like rain, but you got the idea. I was typing on a keyboard. I need, like, if you want me to be engaged with your map, I need to be able to utilize the majority of the units I've been given. Like, at least, like, 70 to 80% of them. And especially when it's echoes, so I'm literally allowed to bring every single unit that's available to me. So I should still be allowed to use even my weakest units, even like my Forsyths and my Luthiers. And it's not like this isn't the case for other maps either, as there's plenty of maps in Echoes where I am absolutely using every character in my army, since there is just that many enemies that need to be dealt with. Like, it doesn't matter how strong you are overall, as long as Forsyth can, like, swang his lance around, he'll be providing something for the army and keeping me motivated, and most importantly, having fun. For the Sluice Gate, it really just feels like busy work for a select few characters. Like, I only basically used Tobin, Python, and Matilda for this map, and Cliff a little bit, and like my healers to just keep everyone topped off, but they weren't really doing anything per se. Like, it just feels like cleanup duty, rather than another battle in this ongoing war. I'm sure someone can absolutely, like, find enjoyability in this chapter somewhere. Maybe they really enjoy the Delthair RNG. I personally just don't. It doesn't work for me at all. And, like, most of this chapter just doesn't work for me at all. I think its objective is interesting for Gaiden, like, standards, but other than that, big shaky hand, I'm gonna go ahead and give enjoyability a fail. And that is going to wrap it up for this week. Oh, man, Echoes is probably the game I've been dreading talking about, just because of, like, its format's really, really awkward to talk about for, like, the ideals of this show. As I mentioned, probably, like, 60 to 70% of the maps aren't even really worth talking about, to the point where, like, obviously I'd like to talk about every single map in the entire series, if given the opportunity, but I'm probably just going to do, like, every notable Echoes map, and then I'll do an Echoes cleanup episode where it's like, alright, here's every Act 1 map I didn't talk about in, like, 10 minutes. This one sucks and it's not worth talking about, blah 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 blah. Do that for, like, 10 maps, something like that. Anyway, while the retaking of the Sluice Gate definitely isn't one of the strongest maps in the series, the fact that it remains a memorable map to me as a whole, when it comes from the game with arguably the worst maps in the series, maybe you could, like, argue Three Houses is worse, Echoes is probably worse, even as much as I'd like to, like, constantly berate Three Houses, Echoes and Gaiden arguably have worse maps. But the fact that this one remains, like, a memorable map in the series as a whole, when it comes from Gaiden, makes it, I think, a pretty underrated chapter overall. It's only succeeding on 2 out of 5 categories, which would normally like categorize this as a bad map, but I think it's rather I still think it's like kind of an underrated map in the context of it being a Gaiden chapter, so to say. It doesn't hit the hardest story-wise or excel gameplay-wise, but the fact that it tries to do something a little bit different in an otherwise very safe and like milquetoast game, and somewhat succeeds at it, that's the most important part. It isn't like Xander where it just completely flops on its face. Like, it does somewhat succeed. The fact that it does that is enough for me to give it at least some respect. Now, in regards to our anagram, listen close, viewer, even closer than you normally listen, as next week's episode is none other than the terrifying and pants-shittening Rat Dreadnought. Meh. For those in the back, if you missed it. Rat Dreadnought. Meh. Alright, that's gonna be it for me. Hope you enjoyed, as usual, guys. I will catch you next time. Have a great one, everyone. I will see you next week.